Well, welcome to Marking the End Times. I'm Mark Hitchcock, and as always, it's great to have you with us today. On today's program, I want to talk about the unprecedented level of the terrorist threat against the United States since October the 7th, since that attack on Israel by Hamas. And it's reached unprecedented levels. I want to talk about that, and also I want to think together with you about the prophetic implications of this elevated threat level. Before we get to that, I want to just mention again, I know we've talked about this a bit. I didn't mention it on last week's video, but want to kind of circle back to this. I know you've heard about this probably several times on our different venues and programs, but the book that Jimmy Evans and I have put out, it's What's Next, the Israel-Gaza War, and that's really what we're talking about today, is a lot of the fallout from that. It's the Israel-Gaza War, connecting today's headlines to tomorrow's events. So I want to just thank the many of you who've gotten online at Amazon and purchased the book. It's a great blessing to us. And if you haven't done that, I encourage you to do it. I bought a dozen or so copies. I've been giving them out to different people. It's a brief book that people can read quickly. And we'll let them know kind of, where all this is coming from, the origin of it, what's happening there now, and where ultimately it's all headed. So I just wanted to apprise you of that again. I'm also just want to mention in a bit, we'll go to our subscriber only section where we're going to talk about several good questions. One is that, how will we communicate with one another in heaven? Will there be different languages in heaven, or will there be kind of a universal language we'll all speak? Also a question about, leaving possessions to people after the rapture takes place. Should we find unsaved people to leave our possessions to? Another question about what does it mean when it refers to the day of visitation in 1 Peter chapter 2 and verse 12. And a final really good question about the resurrection of these believers in the wake of Jesus' resurrection in Matthew chapter 27, verses 51 to 53. Are they in heaven now? Will they be resurrected again? What do we know about these believers who were resurrected and walked around Jerusalem in the aftermath of the resurrection of Jesus there in Matthew chapter 27? So we'll answer those questions in a bit when we get to the subscriber only section. But again, what I want to talk about today is the prophetic implications of this heightened terror threat that we're seeing in the United States today, which really has stunned and really startled, I think, many people. On Tuesday, December 5th, FBI Director Christopher Wray testified before the Senate Judiciary Committee. I mean, he was there to talk about several things, but one of them was this heightened terror threat against the United States in the wake of the October 7th attack by Israel from Hamas. And there have been a lot of sobering headlines that have come out from that testimony that he gave. Just one example I'll give. One headline from Forbes magazine says Hamas-inspired terror threats have reached an unprecedented level. Now, here's a little bit of the language that Christopher Wray used in his testimony he gave. He talked about rising terror threats. He said that terror threats have elevated to an all-time high since October 7th. Now, that's saying something. It's at an all-time high. He said this: every alarm is going off, just like before 9/11. Now, tragically, before 9/11, somehow this was overlooked and they were still able to carry out this attack. Some are saying that with our porous southern border, that the terror cells and the network have been making their way into the United States. And I've heard some say that there could be, coordinated attacks that are all kind of, unleashed at the same time across the United States. And of course, you and I need to be praying that these attacks will be thwarted. Another statement he made is, we see blinking red lights everywhere. Here's something that Christopher Wray said during his testimony. This was especially when he was talking to Senator Lindsey Graham. He said, what I would say that is unique about the environment that we're in right now in my career is that while there have been many times over the years where individual threats could have been higher here or there than where they might be right now, I've never seen a time where all the threats, or so many of the threats, are all elevated, all at exactly the same time. So what we're seeing here is a convergence really of these threats at an unprecedented level like never before in our nation. And we need God's help greatly in our country, because with these threats like they are right now, it's very difficult to see without God's help that there won't be threats carried out, maybe again by individuals or lone wolves, or a lone wolf, or by, again, some kind of coordinated strategic attack in many different places by sleeper cells that are here within our nation. Now, again, we could go on and on about that, but I want to just mention, what are the prophetic implications of this for us? We've talked often in these videos about the future of the United States in Bible prophecy. And I've mentioned many times, I don't think that America is mentioned in Bible prophecy. I don't think America is the unnamed nation in Isaiah 19. I don't think it's Babylon in Revelation 17 and 18. I don't think America is the 10 lost tribes of Israel. All these different views. I don't think America is mentioned in Bible prophecy. And I think that's significant, because if we were the nation that we are today, dominating the world economically, politically, militarily, it seems to me that we would be mentioned somewhere in biblical prophecy. So I think the silence about America is significant. So I think something is going to have to happen to America to reduce us from our superpower status in the end times. And America is clearly not the player that we are today in the world when the end times come. So you say, well, what's going to happen to America? Well, there's a lot of plausible scenarios. Certainly we could have a fall from within. I mean, we have, $33 trillion in debt in our country. I mean, there's a debt bomb out there that's going to explode someday, that's going to dramatically weaken our nation. You have all the depravity we see in our country. So debt and depravity, God's abandonment of our nation because of our depravity, as you see in Romans chapter 1. The abandonment wrath of God, where he abandons a nation and turns them over to their own evil. So there could be a fall from within. There could be a fall from without, with terror and God forbid, even nuclear terror. There's a fear that some small nuclear device could be brought into the United States, or a dirty bomb that unleashes, deadly radiation in a large city. So it can be a fall from without. Now, many of you have heard me before. I think the ultimate fall of America will be a fall from above. It's going to be the rapture of the church. I think that's going to be a dramatic judgment on America that God will bring, as all the salt and light in America is extracted in a moment, in the twinkling of an eye, when the rapture takes place. And you can only imagine when the rapture occurs, what's going to happen in our nation is, somewhere between 5 to 10% of the people in our nation are taken out. In a moment of time. What will happen to the Dow Jones the next day, and unpaid mortgages, and all the military, the troops that are taken out. And you think about even these different scenarios happening in a catastrophic convergence of all the debt that we have, that we at some point won't be able to fund our military. The depravity within our nation, how other nations will take advantage of the rapture to possibly unleash terror against our country. So I think the rapture will be the ultimate judgment against America. I think because of our support of Israel, America may remain strong until the rapture takes place, because we're the main defender of Israel today. Now that leads into the second way that I think these terror attacks against our country are prophetically significant. What's happening in our country, these terror threats, are ultimately all about Israel. It's not really directly about the United States. The threats against the U.S., and there's a lot of heightened threats against Europe right now. They're sensing the same thing we are here, especially because of the Christmas holidays. But these threats against the U.S., and a little bit to a lesser degree against Europe, are ultimately all about Israel. We've come to Israel's support in the wake of this October 7th attack, and Europe has to some degree. Now, I know there's been some wavering in the current administration here in the U.S. of putting constraints on Israel and their attacks against Hamas, but still overall our support has been positive. And Islamic nations consider America to be the great Satan and Israel to be the little Satan. And they believe that the U.S. has to be destroyed because of our support for Israel. And in their eschatology, or their view of the end times, America has to be destroyed for their Mahdi, their Messiah, to return. And so this threatened attack against America here in our homeland is ultimately a result of our support for the nation of Israel. So it ultimately goes back to the satanic conspiracy, the anti-Semitism. They hate us because we love Israel and we support Israel. You know, there have been 75 attacks up to the time I'm doing this video right now. There have been 75 attacks on U.S. troops stationed in the Middle East just since October the 17th. So they're attacking American troops in the Middle East, and there's this, again, massive threat, blinking red lights everywhere, that there's going to be imminent attacks against our homeland. You know, to me, there's a tragic irony here that these Islamist terror groups see the U.S. as the great Satan and Israel as the little Satan. While tragically, they're the ones who are actually satanically energized in their hatred of the Jewish people. Satan is out to destroy the Jewish people because God has made promises to them that he will fulfill. So they're actually fulfilling prophecy of the global hatred of Israel and the Jewish people in the end times. Thirdly, then the third prophetic implication I would see here is these terror attacks against the U.S. homeland could spark a much greater war in the Middle East. I mean, think about America's response to 9/11. We attacked Afghanistan, we attacked Iraq, we invaded those nations and attacked them. And many believe today that terror in the United States will come from Hamas, Hezbollah, or the Houthi rebels in Saudi Arabia. I call these, the three H's of terror. Hamas, of course, who's in Gaza, Hezbollah, who's in Lebanon and Syria, and the Houthi rebels in Saudi, they're in Yemen. Not in Saudi Arabia. They're south of Saudi Arabia in Yemen. And of course, Iran is the head of the snake in all of this. And so a fierce U.S. response against Hamas or Hezbollah or the Houthis, but ultimately against Iran, could trigger all kinds of consequences. Even an attack by the U.S. possibly against Iran, if these terror attacks against the U.S. are catastrophic enough. And this could be a further setup for the Gog-Magog war in Ezekiel 38 and 39. But as I said earlier, you and I need to pray that these terror attacks against the United States will be thwarted. We don't want to see our nation come under these terror attacks and see our citizens killed. We need to be praying earnestly for our nation and for our leaders and for our intelligence services, that they can ferret out these terrorist cells and these attacks can be stopped before they take place. We need to be praying earnestly for our nation. But let me just close with this. You and I are awaiting the rapture. We're waiting for the rapture. We're waiting for the Lord Jesus to come. And he's going to come someday and catch us away to heaven. And here we are at Christmas time with, war in Ukraine and war in Israel and wars and rumors of wars all over the world. But Isaiah 9 tells us that the Prince of Peace is coming. And really, he's the Prince of Shalom. Jesus is the Messiah who's going to come and ultimately someday bring peace to this earth. And anti-Semitism is raging now throughout the earth, but it's going to end someday. I don't know if you've ever thought about this before, but when the Lord Jesus returns, he's God in human flesh, but he's a Jew. This world is going to be ruled over someday by a Jew. And the world is fighting against that now, but he's coming back someday to rule and reign and to set up a global shalom throughout this earth. But you and I are waiting for the rapture, which is the next event on God's prophetic calendar. It's what's going to set all of this in motion. And you and I need to keep looking up. And I know we hear about these unprecedented terror threats, especially around Christmas time. It can be very unsettling to us. But let me just leave you with this final promise from Jesus. What did Jesus say the night before he died on the cross? He said, "Don't let your heart be troubled. You believe in God, believe also in me. In my Father's house are many dwelling places. If it were not so, I would have told you. I go and prepare a place for you. If I go and prepare a place for you, I will come and receive you again into myself, that where I am, there you may be also." Jesus is coming. It may be very soon, and we can take great comfort in that. That's ultimately our hope in this dark world in which we live. We're going to go now to the subscriber-only section. I'll answer those questions that I'd mentioned earlier, and so we'll go to that section. If you're not a subscriber, you can go to endtimes.com, and for just $7 a month, you can become a subscriber and have access to a lot of great information, a lot of great archived information as well. So we'd love to have you become part of this community. But we'll go now to that subscriber only section and answer these questions.